In 1974, a film would be released that would be so repulsive and shocking that it would be banned in over 10 different countries. Entertainment Weekly called it the most terrifying film ever made, only to be beaten by The Exorcist. But a real horror story wasn't on the screen, it was on the set. Why did a single scene take over 27 hours to film? Who was the real-life killer that the film was inspired by? And most importantly, what drove the actor playing Leatherface to actually attack his co-star and draw blood? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Montgomery and welcome to Bloody Good. Today we're stepping inside the heat-stroke-fueled nightmare of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a landmark horror film that inspired films like Alien, shocks Quentin Tarantino with its gruesome scenes, and was so horrifying that it made Guillermo del Toro become a vegetarian. The film follows a group of young teenagers traveling through rural Texas on a road trip who are hunted down by a cannibalistic family. But the road to this movie starts in the most unlikely of places, the hardware section of a store during Christmas. Tobe Hooper, the film's director, first conceived of the idea for the film while out Christmas shopping. He was stuck in a large crowd while visiting a store and ended up stuck in the hardware section. Whilst trying to figure out how he was going to get through the sea of shoppers, he noticed a chainsaw, and this was what sparked the initial idea. While the initial spark for the film came from a dark fantasy, the real inspiration came from a much more truthful and evil source of influence. Ed Gein was a killer and body snatcher operating in Plainsfield, Wisconsin in the 1950s. He would steal bodies from local graveyards and fashion them into furniture and clothing items. These included chairs, lampshades, skin suits, and many more disturbing artifacts. He was also found guilty of the death of 2 women. His heinous crimes would go on to inspire many more horror films, such as Psycho, The Silence of the Lambs, and of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Hooper wrote the film with Kim Henkel. The two would get together and write pages separately on old typewriters. The intention for the film to be based on a true story was meant to be a reflection of the lies of the government at the time around coverage of Vietnam and the Watergate scandal, even with it being firmly established that the film's events are fictional. Gunnar Hansen, the man who played Leatherface, has had numerous encounters with people who have claimed to have met or known of the real Leatherface. The film had numerous titles throughout its development, starting off as Leatherface, with other titles such as Stalking Leatherface and more bizarre variations including Saturn in Retrograde and my personal favourite, Head Cheese, before being changed to the iconic Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Once the film was written, it was time to fund the film. Trying to increase their odds, the duo had prepared 3 separate budgets for the film: a high-end budget of $60,000, a mid-range budget of $40,000, and a low-range budget of $25,000, where the film would be shot in black and white. It was thanks to Hooper's friendship with Bill Parsley that they were able to finance the film. Parsley formed a company named MAB Inc., through which he invested $60,000. However, this resulted in Parsley's company owning 50% of the film and its profits. This would result in some complications down the road, but more on that later. When casting the actors for the film, all the actors were relative unknowns at the time. When Gunnar Hansen stepped into the room to audition as Leatherface, he knew very little about the character. Hooper proceeded to describe the character in great detail and asked Hansen if he was violent or crazy, to which of course Hansen responded no. When pressed further and asked if he could act violent or crazy, Hansen responded saying, of course. Hansen had no way of knowing that by the end of this shoot, the line between acting and a total mental breakdown would completely disappear. Knowing that he would be playing a character with mental disabilities, Hansen wanted to give an accurate portrayal to his performance. He went to a school for the mentally handicapped and watched how they moved and listened to them talk to get a feel for the character. He made a serious effort to portray the character in a way that was as non-offensive as possible. Filming began in the summer of 1973 with the plan to shoot for 2 weeks, filming 7 days a week and working 16-hour days during the brutal Texas summer, where temperatures reached over 37 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees in freedom units. The schedule was insane, and for context, I've worked on some big budget Hollywood film sets where 2 weeks was spent shooting a single part of one scene. Now, even with the budget they had of $60,000, money was still tight, and the production was forced to cut corners and work on favors throughout filming. The famous farmhouse they shot in didn't fare much better, with it being an awful place to work. The house had no AC. Art director Robert A. Byrne covered the walls with real animal blood sourced from slaughterhouses. The animal bones seen in the film were obtained by Byrne driving around Texas and picking up various bits and pieces of roadkill that he found. For the costume of Leatherface, Hooper had a specific vision for the character. This vision often collided with the limited budget the production had to work with. To start, we have to talk about the masks. In the film, Leatherface is seen wearing 3 iconic masks: the killing mask, the old lady mask, and the pretty woman mask. Hansen explained the motivation behind the mask, saying, "The reason he wore the mask, according to Toby and Kim, was that the mask really determined his personality. Who he wanted to be that day determined what mask he put on. So when Drayton comes home with Sally, Leatherface is wearing the old lady mask. He's wearing an apron and carrying a wooden spoon. He wants to be domestic, helpful in the kitchen. At dinner he wears a different face, the pretty woman." The idea around the character of Leatherface was that under the mask he had no personality, so the mask he wore was what informed his personality and actions. The mask and the clothing proved to be a burden throughout filming. Hansen's costumes were not washed during filming, resulting in having an unbearable odour that disgusted the cast and crew. Additionally, thanks to the 3-inch heels he wore, making him over 6'3", and the mask's limited visibility, Hansen at one point knocked himself unconscious during a scene in his workshop by walking headfirst into a doorway. With the brutal heat and the disgusting conditions, this had a profound effect on the cast. Hansen would often get to set early before the rest of the cast to get a feel for his upcoming scenes. He would choose to keep his distance from the other actors so he didn't humanize himself to them. In fact, most of the actors didn't even meet Hansen or even see him in costume until it was their first and usually last scene with him. The dinner scene is where all of these issues would collide to make one of the longest filming sessions in horror history, with the scene taking 36 hours to shoot. The scene actually shot in the daytime with blackout curtains being used in the windows. Couple this with the fact there was no air conditioning and the amount of crew and cast in a single room, temperatures soared, reaching over 48 degrees Celsius or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. With temperature reaching unbearable heights and the amount of time the scene took, the food on the table began rotting. Additionally, what didn't help was that, if you remember, the animal bones and the animal carcasses decorating the home were real, making the smell of the house unbearable, forcing a handful of actors to take breaks between scenes to throw up outside. Arguably, Hansen had it the worst, as he was stuck in the mask made of fiberglass and latex and was unable to take it off during the short 5-minute breaks they would get between scenes. What was the reason for shooting such unbearably long hours, I hear you ask? Well, for that, you can thank John Dugan. Once he had the makeup and prosthetics applied to him, he refused to ever go through the 5-hour process again, forcing the crew to shoot all the scenes in a single session. This unbelievable amount of time shooting, coupled with the heat, caused some of the actors to genuinely mentally break on set. This resulted in some of the actors getting a bit too into character, with Hansen remarking at one point when he was ordered to kill Sally, played by Marilyn Burns, he genuinely wanted to kill her for a few seconds. At one point, Hansen reached his breaking point. When filming a scene where Sally would have her finger cut open and had her blood drank by Grandpa, they experienced technical issues with the tube that was meant to shoot fake blood, as it kept clogging. Hansen simply cut Marilyn Burns' finger open, for real, without telling her, as by this point it was near the end of shooting and Hansen was willing to do anything in order to finish filming. Hansen remarked that during the dinner scene there was very little acting going on. When later reflecting on the scene, Edward Neal, who played the hitchhiker, said, "Filming that scene was the worst time of my life. I'd been in Vietnam with people trying to kill me, so I guess that shows how bad it was," and said he might kill director Tobe Hooper if he ever saw him again. Now, sadly, this was not the last time someone would be injured on set during filming, as is commonplace for low-budget horror films, unfortunately. During the scene where Sally was chased by Leatherface through the bushes, she managed to cut herself quite badly during the sequence. So much so that much of the blood you see on Marilyn Burns' costume was her real blood. Other noteworthy incidents to mention was the scene in which Leatherface dismembers Kirk. The actor William Vale was told to stay as still as possible unless he wanted to be killed. Hansen brought the real and functional chainsaw within 3 inches of Vale's face. Seeing the cavalier attitude to safety the production had, Hansen was rightfully nervous when it was his turn to be on the receiving end of the chainsaw. He reportedly asked director Hooper what was the plan for filming that final scene. Hooper would simply respond flippantly, telling him he'd figure it out. Hansen's fears turned out to be justified, as when it came to film the scene, the production had placed a metal plate over his leg with a piece of meat on top of it, for where the real chainsaw would hit. The scream heard in the scene is a real scream of pain, as when the chainsaw went through the meat and hit the metal plate, the heat generated from the friction was so hot, it burned Hansen and he genuinely believed he'd been hit by the chainsaw. The 2-week production had gone over, with it actually taking a total of 4 weeks to shoot all the scenes for the film, and this would only be the start of their problems as they went into editing the film. Despite the film's reputation for being one of the most horrific films ever made, it's actually surprisingly tame in its gore. However, when they finished the initial cut, it received an X rating, resulting in them having to cut down the film further. In the end, when the film was finished, the budget had ballooned. Now, sources on this vary greatly, but it's estimated that the film's budget was originally $60,000 and had risen to anywhere between $93,000 and $300,000. Now, if you remember from earlier, director Hooper and writer Henkel only owned 50% of the film, meaning they would only earn 50% of any revenue. This would prove to be a problem as the actors who agreed to be in the film took part of their payment in the form of the back-end gross. But they were not told half of the ownership had already been sold off. This meant the actors received far less in payment than they expected, with Hansen only receiving $800. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre premiered in Austin, Texas on October 11th, 1974. When the film was previewed, audience members found it so horrifying that many walked out of screenings, but the film was a smash hit, generating $30,926,225 worldwide, making it one of the most successful independent films of all time until Halloween would release just 4 years later. Being such a horrific masterpiece, the film was banned in numerous countries, including England, West Germany, Brazil, Chile, Finland, France, Iceland, Ireland, Norway, Singapore, and Sweden. The film had a mixed reception critically, with some hating it, such as the Los Angeles Times, which called it despicable, and others loving it, such as Roger Ebert went on to praise the film, calling it as violent and gruesome and blood-soaked as the title promises. At the end of the day, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has cemented its place in the history of horror, spanning numerous sequels and remakes. If you're a fan of horror and you'd like to hear more about insane production stories of how some of these films get made, click the link on your screen right now and find out why Maximum Overdrive was the first and last film Stephen King ever directed, and what was the almost fatal on-set accident that caused someone to lose an eye. In the meantime, I've been Montgomery, this has been bloody good. Thank you so much for watching.